Hello, welcome to today's masterclass from the PE Tutors PE portal. Today we're going to be in Learning Zone 1, looking at the physical activity project, and well, more specifically, we're going to be looking at your reflection and evaluation of your training program. The brief overview, which is below me, you can see there, we're going to take a look at how you can evaluate the effectiveness of your overall program against three things: ease of execution, progress made, variation and progression. Then we're going to look at some challenges or barriers that you might have experienced when completing it that might have detracted from optimal execution. And then lastly, we are going to look at how you can think of some future improvements to make. So what could you have tweaked to have made it better for next time? So we're going to get started straight away with a brief overview of where you're currently up to. You will have already identified your activity. You will have done your research into the skills, tactics, and knowledge of the rules required to execute well in your chosen activity. Hopefully by now you have performed and recorded your current level at the start of your PAP. You then would have analysed that performance, you would have identified weaknesses, you would have set 4 performance goals, you would then have researched how you could have gone about training on the back of your first performance analysis. You then designed the 4 to 6 week training program, which is what we're going to be evaluating today. And hopefully you have a small stack of reflections on each of your training logs as well, so that you could then have completed a second performance analysis to check, almost hold up the mirror of the first performance compared to the second performance, and to see where those gains or perhaps losses or plateaus were made. So that's where we're up to in the PAP as a whole, which leaves this session. And by the end, you will have evaluated or be able to evaluate the effectiveness of your training plan and to have explained challenges you faced, and like we said at the start, be able to recommend some future improvements as well. So I've already mentioned these three things, but just to elaborate on them a little bit more, in order to assess effectiveness, these three things will help you massively in almost having enough to talk about, or being able to approach your evaluation from three different perspectives. First off is ease of execution. Now, for any training program to be implemented, it needs to be manageable. It needs to be able to be picked up by anyone. It doesn't have to be a specialist. It doesn't require depth and detail of knowledge in training types or physiology. It shouldn't need a personal trainer or a coach. It should be able to be picked up and implemented relatively easily and quickly. So we're going to be looking at your training plan to see if it meets this standard. Second is, well, did it make you progress? So we're going to take a look at your performance goals, which you set after performance 1, and we're going to, I'm going to talk you through how you can analyze and compare your first performance with your second one and draw out your most significant progress, some progress, and perhaps no progress within your 4 performance goals. Because by doing that, you'll then be able to see how much and where you progress towards your goals. And then by linking that to your training plan, you're going to be able to evaluate it really well, talking about the main strengths of it because they lead to certain progress, whereas other parts of it probably could be removed for next time because they didn't generate the progress that I intended it to. And then lastly, the ability to vary and progress the training. Think back to your knowledge on principles of training, where we need to incorporate variation to avoid tedium so that we can continually progress and overload our body. So a good, effective training plan incorporates these principles to keep it enjoyable, to keep it constantly increasing in the level of challenge that we experience. It's only by doing those two things that we can protect motivation and continue that progress trajectory. So we're going to take a look at your training program to see if they can, or not if it can, but if it did hit these 3 standards. So first off, ease of execution. So in your reflection, you'll be needing to use your training log and any sort of reflections that you made during your training plan. Now, if you've been following along through the portal, you would have used the previous framework and activity sheet to generate your training plan. And underneath each session, there was a reflection box. So if you have been completing those, not all the time, because that's probably unmanageable, but trying, or hopefully you've got as many of those as possible that you can now read back through And what you'll be able to see is patterns emerging in things that went well or things that constantly cropped up as being a little bit of a problem. So some of the questions that you might be able to consider: did you have the right equipment? Or did you reflect some weeks and say, I had to change my plan because I didn't have access to 15-kilogram dumbbells? Did you have enough time to complete what you had planned? Okay, notice how I'm saying what you had planned, because it might have been a really good session, and there's nothing wrong with completing a really good session, making it up on the spot almost. But did it vary from what you had already written down? If so, then it's great that you were able to adapt, but we need to focus on making sure that we don't need to adapt. So how could we actually have improved that plan in the first place to make it so that you didn't have to adapt? So did you have enough time to complete what you had planned? Did you have to alter the training sessions as you went along? That's what we just said. Did any sessions require exceptional energy or motivation on some days? In some days of the week, did you pitch the level too high, especially after the day before, where you also did a high intensity exercise? So it's going back through and seeing what went well and what could be improved for next time. How easy was it to actually complete? Did you find the sessions enjoyable? If you did, then it probably would have been easy to execute, because every single session you turned up, you were glad to be there. You were excited to complete it. If you were thinking, oh, it's going to be boring, this is going to be painful, then it probably wouldn't have been easy to execute. It would have been difficult to find that motivation to perform at the intensity levels that you'd planned to do. And then lastly, could you or someone else repeat your training program in the exact same way? How replicable is it? Is it clearly stated and laid out? How easy is it to access it, to understand what needs doing and when and where? If not, and only you understand it, and if anyone's asking you what's going on it, and you have to work hard to explain the different components, then it might not be very easy to execute. Easy for you because you planned it and understand it. But what about if you started to share that? So second point down, so we've done ease of execution, just looking at the overview here. Done ease of execution, now we're going to look at progress made or progress towards goals. Now we'll get to the table in a moment, but for this part of your evaluation, you'll need to have your first and second performance analysis side by side, and you'll need to have your performance goals. When you've got those, you'll be able to then complete a table similar to the one below, where you're going to be writing down specific components of each performance goal, and I'll expand on that in a moment, but specific parts that you made substantial, some, or no progress in. Now, it's absolutely fine if you make no progress. Hopefully, there'll be some progress that you can talk about, but what this part of your PAP is all about is not effective training planning or performance analysis, or performance assessment, I should say. This is more to do with your reflective skills, your evaluative skills. So can you take a step back from your training program, look at it, face value, and see if it brought about the changes that you want? If it didn't, then obviously there was something wrong with the training program. So you now need to go in with a critical eye and say, well, what parts didn't work? What parts would I change if I were to do it again? So that's what we're setting ourselves up for here. So when you've got your 2 performance analysis and you've got your 4 performance goals, break that performance goal down. So look at the example here. So performance goal 1 from soccer: control a ball from height before making a lofted pass 8 out of 10 times at a 25-meter distance to a teammate on the move. Quite an elaborate target, but I used Smart Target to generate that. It wasn't just being able to pass it to a teammate. It was more specific. It had measurable aspects. So now I can break it down into the control part, the lofted pass, the consistency, 8 out of 10, the distance, 25 meters, and to the teammate on the move. So could I do this if my teammate was stationary, or am I now able to do it as they're moving? At what speed are they moving? All of these different parts of this one performance goal I can now break down. So to start with, look at that substantial progress column. My ball height was consistently above head height. So every time I made connection with that ball, it was going above head height. That was substantial progress because previously, if I look at my first performance and I look at the data, my statistical analysis, 1 in 10 went above head height. Now 9 in 10 are going above head height. That is substantial progress. So there must have been a reason for that. If you've made any sort of progress, there must be a cause, because we're looking at the effects here. There must have been a cause, and your cause was your training program. But what was the specific cause of this specific piece of progress? That's what you'll need to be able to elaborate on. Now, I'm going to tell you what the activity is in a moment, and there is a tutorial and a framework that you can follow step by step in order to complete it. But just sort of introducing this section to you. We've got ease of access, ease of execution, then progress towards goals. How effective was your training program at eliciting substantial progress? Now, we need to remember that we might have to, well, when we are evaluating, we will have to talk about the downsides. So, no progress. I didn't make any progress in my first touch. Looking at my performance number 1 and performance number 2, the distance the ball was away from me after my first touch, there was no difference. So I didn't make any progress. Okay, why? Obviously, I would have loved to have made progress in that area, but my training program didn't cause that. Why not? What was it lacking? Where was the error in my planning? So we've got the good things and we've got the bad things. So here's the example. Just get all of the things up on the screen. There we go. So for that substantial progress, maybe I was consistently reaching 25 meters with my passes. Every single one was going the correct distance. So what I was able to do was then go into the whys. I was consistently hitting my lofted passes over 25 meters. However, in my first performance, a third of my lofted passes made this distance. So I've made, what's that, 200% improvement. If I made a third at the first part, another 100% is 2/3, another 100% is, 3 out of 3. One reason for this improvement in distance could be my explosive strength and power in my kicking leg. I was able to generate more force in my movement and convert this into a further kick. So I'm explaining how my performance has changed, which has led to my goal being met. Now I look at my training program. So why? What caused this improvement in explosive strength and power? Well, I included plyometric training sessions with box jumps. So perhaps me trying to beat last week's score kept me motivated, it kept me progressing and overloading my body, it kept my leg muscles working at my highest intensity, which is important when developing strength and power. So it was because of my plyometric training that I developed my explosive strength and power, which then led to me being able to kick the ball further, which led to me achieving that specific part of my performance goal. So it's almost looking at the breadcrumbs. Just work your way back. What was the original cause? What did you plan to do and then implemented, which led to what improvement in your physiology or psychology, which then led to what development in your performance goal? Lastly then, so we've got ease of execution, progress made, third part looking at the overview just there, variation and progression. So what opportunity was there for you to keep it varied, to keep it challenging? Because in purple and blue here, we've got those principles of training. Variety, it prevents boredom, it keeps motivation high. Overload, it ensures the body is challenged to get better. So it's so important that our training program met these two principles. Did it? Now it's time for you to reflect. So you've got some questions there as well. Were you able to remain motivated? Look at your training logs. Did you put a smiley face down or a sad face down? Did you say, I was bored? Did you say hard work? Did you write down, it was brilliant, loved it? Look at the language you're using during your reflections, because that's going to tell you whether or not there was enough variety. You can even just look at the training program and perhaps color coordinate it with the different types of training that you used. Were you always in the same facility? Were you always using the same equipment? Go back through, circle in blue whenever you were inside using a particular piece of equipment. circling green when you were outside without any equipment. So go back through, analyze how varied was it. You could do the same thing with overload. Perhaps put a tick on each training session that was made harder than the one before. And then just from face value, you'll be able to have a quick look and see, well, out of 20 different training sessions, only 3 of them were made harder than last week's. That would suggest there wasn't a lot of overload. Could that be the reason behind your lack of progress? And I reiterate, it's okay for you to say that your training program was bad. It's okay to say that no progress was made. You're getting assessed on your ability to be critical. Probably one of the first training programs you've written, so it's okay that no progress was made. But you need to be able to see what was wrong so that you can then tweak, change, and improve it for the future. So, again, there is a do-it-yourself. There is a framework for you to be completing now, Framework 1 and Tutorial 1, which are here and here, and you can access them within the portal. I would recommend watching the video while having the framework either open or printed, just so you can make notes as the tutorial takes it through. But yeah, give that a watch. It would all make sense. Either pause it now and go off and do that. If not, we're going to carry on. So, next up, we've now looked at the effectiveness of our training program. We're now going to look at, well, what challenges or barriers were in place that led to your training plan not being optimal. What detracted from the level of implementation that you were able to achieve? So the first thing we need to do is identify the challenges. What was difficult about you completing your training program? So by looking at different parts of your training program, where did it require extra effort? Where did it require extra time? Where did it require extra planning or adjustments or tweaks? Those sort of sticking points that prevented it from being this really easy, simple process to follow. So there are some questions for you to consider. Were all of the principles of training understood before you designed your plan? Or were you learning them concurrently while completing your training plan? And every time you learned something new, you then had to make a tweak. If so, well, that was a challenge. It was challenging to learn on the go and to tweak it on the go. And we're going to look in a moment about things to overcome these challenges. Were you able to think up enough training types to suit your specific sport? Did you include enough variety? Boredom would have been a challenge. Coming up with all of the different drills and sessions and the variation, that's a challenge. If you haven't done this before, which you probably haven't done, then it would have been difficult to go off and find appropriate and a high number of different training sessions. Did you get your timings right? Was the equipment always there? Or did you run into accessibility issues or availability or costing? Were you able to progress your training appropriately? Now, that's a key word there, appropriately, because it's very easy to, let's just take weight training, for example, to lift a 10 kilogram dumbbell one week and then a 15 kilogram dumbbell the next week. That's technically progression. You've made it heavier. But is it appropriate? Or were you ready for that 15 kilogram dumbbell? Probably not from one week to the next. It would take a week or two of work on one level, and gradually you're able to cope with that better, and you can see the reps increasing or the sets increasing, or your perceived level of exertion when doing that training session, and then you progress it a certain amount, perhaps 5%. Not going from 10 to 15 because that's a bigger number and that's what overload is. No. Were you intelligent with your overload? Were you able to log your training sessions? Right now you might not have reflections to go back through and to aid you in your reflection process. If so, why not? Was it a challenge to have the pen, the paper, the training program printed off and taken with you outside, even though it was rainy or wet or windy? Now that's a challenge. By identifying these real life issues that you came up against, that's how you're going to be able to create real life solutions. Now, this isn't just theory. You've done this. What made it difficult? It could have been the weather. So were the sessions planned enjoyable? Another challenge. Did you have enough equipment? Did you have the right partner? Did you have the right time to actually enjoy this whole process? Or was it something that you just managed to get through? If so, how could you change that for next time? That's what we're going to be looking at now. So one example could be lack of equipment. Now, I haven't just left it at lack of equipment. I've expanded on it, and this will be what you need to do as well. So the challenges I faced, I planned to use equipment the school had one of, but others had also chosen to use it. So some sessions I had to share with others, which meant that I wasn't as efficient with my time and had to adapt what I had originally planned to do. So I've taken the issue, well, there wasn't equipment. Okay, expand on that. Tell me why. Where was the equipment? Why did you plan on using the equipment if it wasn't going to be there? Was it there when you originally planned? What changed? So make sure you elaborate on those challenges. I was just talking about the weather there. Example, bad weather. Okay, why was that a challenge? Well, when it was raining, it meant that we couldn't perform outside, which meant that we had to come inside into the sports hall, and the sports hall with all 30 of us in a class was too small, and I couldn't practice my 25-metre lofted passes because the sports hall was only 30 metres long. And a lot of the students were working in those other spaces. So I had to adapt, the adaptation wasn't as good, and I missed out on the chance to practice my lofted passes. So elaborate, okay? Once we've got the challenges, we can then start to look at the solutions. So you've got your challenges, you've got your faulty processes, you've got the things that detracted from the potential, detracted from the optimal implementation of your training plan. Now it's time to be practical in your solutions. Let's not just throw time, money, expertise at the solutions, because that's not always going to work, and it especially isn't going to work for students in a school saying that, oh, we just need access to multi-million-pound fitness studio. Be realistic. If you were to recommend to the year coming up behind you, how could they improve their PAP? Well, here's what we found difficult, so perhaps you can avoid it for next year. That's what you're going for here. So what would you do to fix that faulty process? How would things have gone in a perfect world? Therefore, what could you have done to get yourself closer to that perfect model? What actions could you have taken to increase that chance of that perfect training plan? Where could you have spent more time? What would you have spent more time learning? Going back to what we said on the previous slide about, did you know the principles of training and how to train it, or how to create a training program before you actually did? Or were you learning it at the same time? If you were learning at the same time, then maybe the recommendation for next time is to get the understanding first before you get into training programming. And then lastly, would any extra money have helped? Once you've got these solutions, okay, you'll need to put them into a table. So as you can see, I've got my example here. I plan to use equipment, which I expanded this whole paragraph out of lack of equipment. So now all of these solutions are expanded out of the expansion of lack of equipment. So you can see how much detail you can go into here. So the first solution could be, well, complete a resource checklist at the beginning of the training program. Actually go into the sports cupboard and have a look at what equipment exists. How much is there? And then if you see that there is only one or two of a certain item, let's say boxing gloves and boxing pads, there's only 2 sets. Okay, go back to your class. Is anyone planning on using boxing pads and gloves? Oh, yes, 2 other groups are, 2 other people. Right, what days are you planning on using them? And you can start to liaise so that you can plan either alternative sessions when they're using them, or you just each take a certain day. So you share that equipment. You could also have printed off your weekly sessions. So let's say you did go into the sports hall or outside and the equipment for some reason was being used elsewhere. Well, if you've got your weekly training plan in front of you, instead of just being committed to one session, that's the only thing you got in front of you, you'll be able to look ahead. Right, I can't do my Tuesday session. However, on Thursday, I was planning on doing some continuous training, a little bit of a run. So if I complete that one today, and a bit of a switcheroo, You're still sticking to your training program, you've just altered the timings. If the equipment was inexpensive, could you have gone and bought it? Now, with a view to using it after the PAP's all finished and you take it home? Maybe, maybe not. It's just a potential solution. So there's 4 things there that you could do to overcome the challenge, which was lack of equipment. So what you'll need to do is, again, using that framework, using that tutorial, go through that final section on solutions solutions to your challenges. So what detracted from you achieving optimal training programming? What got in the way? Okay? What could you have done, or what could you do in the future so that those challenges don't exist? And that brings us up to the end. So you should now be able to, or you can now, evaluate the effectiveness of your training program using that section there in blue, that ease of execution, that progress made, the variation and progressive overload. Was it there? Were you able to accomplish those things? That's going to tell you how good or bad your training program was. Then actually executing on it, actually implementing it. What got in its way? What could you do in the future to improve it? Recommendations for future improvements. And that is the end of this masterclass, how to reflect on your training program. So I hope that helped. Remember, you've got the framework and the tutorial to help guide you through the activities from this lesson. But I hope that helped, and I'll see you again next lesson. Bye now.